is a viper's nest of disrespect. They have always had trouble keeping their players grounded and need some real men back in the dressing room. I feel sorry for the manager Ruben Amorim because I firmly believe he has walked into a viper's nest. And it will need everyone from the very, very top of the club and every supporter that walks through the gates at Old Trafford to believe in him for him to succeed. He has talked this week of relegation and the club needing a shock, all against a backdrop of certain players going through the motions in training and disrespecting the manager. From timekeeping to attitude to every part of your training regime, like when you play in small-sided practice games, you try to replicate match days and play with intensity. It's not like a switch you can flick on when it suits. I spoke last week about the example Bruno Fernandes sets, and I hear about Alejandro Garnacho being unhappy with the manager. Can someone remind me of just who he is? The last time I looked he was only a 20-year-old boy. One who is only one step up, on a 10-rung ladder. Who are you? He acts like a wrong-un on the football pitch and, unless he changes, he's got no chance of fulfilling what obvious potential he has. Going back to my generation and before, Manchester United have always had a problem in keeping players grounded. Then it was always about who's the next George Best, the next Dennis Law or the next Bobby Charlton. There have been good players, but whether it is the weight of the jersey, or the adulation they receive too early, it didn't happen for them. Premier League teams are forced into paying fortunes to kids because, if they don't, someone else will. But you're only ever investing in potential, and more often than not when you give a young man too much too soon they get in their armchair and never fulfill their potential. I never get tired of underlining the value of having good senior professionals in your dressing room, but there has been a drought of real men at Manchester United for over a decade now. Generally, a coach can work with his group of 25 players 4 days a week and, on match days, they are occupied with the game. In a normal week, a manager might be in their company 2 hours a day, for days of that working week. How much individual attention can he possibly give them? And that's why you need good senior professionals to help. Digging others out when they're not coming up to standards that are needed if you want to be winning trophies, and just affording time and advice to these young men, given the distractions in the modern game today. They have an enormous part to play in getting the message across, exerting standards, so that come match day there has to be less finger pointing and more looking in the mirror. Where are the senior figures here? Fernandes? Is that the best you can do? United supporters will remember Sir Alex Ferguson calling Paul Scholes out of retirement at 37, and keeping Gary Neville around the place past his sell-by date, simply because they were two fantastic types that would have trained every day like it was the last session they ever had. What an example to have for young players making their way in the game. For too long, the current United players have accepted mediocrity. You can sense it's a dressing room where individuals go, "It's not my fault." United squad has had a drought of real men for over a decade. Who are the current senior professionals? Right now, it's a very difficult watch to the who turn up for their team every other week when United concede a goal. They are just shrugging their shoulders, always looking for someone else to give them the answers. That is not the behavior of big players. They need to show what they are made of, not go hiding like they are now. Is football mirroring society where no one wants to take responsibility for their actions these days? When I joined Liverpool, it was tough schooling. I was in a dressing room with characters like Emlyn Hughes and Tommy Smith. They'd never allow you to be sloppy in training. The coach Ronnie Moran was the greatest influence on my career, but the only time he'd afford us a pat on the back was when we physically had some silverware in the dressing room. We'd say on a regular basis, "You're only happy when you're unhappy, Ronnie." And he would look at us, shake his head and say, "You should have seen the players we had in the past, son." At that point you were always made to feel inferior to the players that had gone before, individually, and collectively. But I always viewed it as motivation to get better. Apart from a few occasions under Ron Atkinson's reign, I can't remember United challenging us at the top, yet they were getting all the headlines week in, week out. Too many United players get put on a pedestal too soon and start to believe what is written or said about them. But it's not great reading now. Ruben Amorim's plan against Newcastle was football suicide, writes Danny Murphy, but here's how the Man United boss can tweak it to stop the rot. Most matches are won or lost in midfield. Managers have drilled that into players, and it's still the case today. Few teams ask 2 players to go up against 3 when they aren't equipped for the job and don't get any help, so I found it bizarre Ruben Amorim did it against a side as athletic as Newcastle on Monday night. I was at Old Trafford and could see the problem within a few minutes. By the time the Manchester United boss reacted, his team were 2-0 down and it was game over. It was football suicide, and unless Amorim changes either his system or the personnel, performances and results aren't going to change. Particularly worrying as United are down in 14th. We know Amorim's 3-4-3 worked extremely well for him at Sporting Lisbon, but the Premier League is a ruthless place. Only one team has won the title here playing that way, and Antonio Conte Chelsea were blessed in having outstanding holding midfielders Nemanja Matic and N'Golo Kante, who did the running of 2 players, and Eden Hazard, who made sure opponents were often more worried about him than going on the front foot themselves. United have none of those assets. Ruben Amorim has come in for criticism for his setup in Manchester United's 2-0 defeat by Newcastle. They are easy to play against and easy to beat. To play a formation where you're outnumbered in midfield, and then give the extra running to 30-somethings Casemiro and Christian Eriksen, was a contradiction. Even though things improved in the second half with the younger Kobbie Mainoo, it was largely because Newcastle were comfortably ahead and took their foot off the gas. I've been impressed by Amorim since he arrived at Old Trafford, but this was a first significant black mark. He must have known Newcastle are flying at the moment, and his most energetic midfielder Manuel Ugarte was suspended. But the outcome still took him by surprise. United fans will be wondering what he does next. Long term, if he wants to stick with 3-4-3, he is going to need a lot of new players. The problem isn't just the midfielders. There is a lack of legs in United's backline too. Harry Maguire and Matthijs de Ligt were reluctant to step into midfield for fear of being exposed against Alexander Isak. At the other end, Newcastle were prepared to press and push forward, confident that Fabian Schär could cope one-on-one with Rasmus Højlund. If United had a back 3 of Virgil van Dijk, William Saliba and Mickey van de Ven, they could be far more aggressive. Given he's got the group he's inherited for now, Amorim has to make some tweaks. It may not fit in with the United philosophy of open attacking football at the Theatre of Dreams, but this is not a time to worry about that. They need results. If he's determined to play with wingbacks even during these difficult times, he should at least add an extra midfielder to become 3-5-2. It would mean the distances between his midfield players would be closer. At the moment, every team is overrunning United, not just Newcastle, but Bournemouth and Wolves also in recent games. United have also suffered home defeats to the likes of Bournemouth Pictured and Nottingham Forest in recent weeks. He could also make the pitch smaller by deliberately allowing opponents to have possession. Become more compact so that his defensive unit is closer together. They do have counter-attacking threats like Amad Diallo and Alejandro Garnacho who could benefit from that. It served Nottingham Forest well this season, including in their win at Anfield. United are in a mess. Their forwards lack the brilliance of Mohamed Salah or Isak. The midfielders don't have the running power of Ryan Gravenberch or Rodri. Amorim has to try something. Whether it's giving young Toby Collier a chance because he can get about the park, or even putting Lisandro Martinez into midfield to allow Lenny Yoro a run of games. One thing looks certain. Sticking to the current formula will lead to more failure.